Julie Mae Bowling was born on November 21, 1961, to parents Harold and Dorothy. In 2006, 45-year-old Julie was married to Mark Bowling, who was 9 years younger than she was and lived in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. However, their relationship was far from perfect, and Mark wasn't exactly the most faithful person. He was a mortician and owned the Bowling Funeral Home and Crematory, which had 3 locations. His parents were also morticians and were the reason for his current success. Before meeting Julie in the late 1990s, Mark was involved with a local grocery store cashier named Rose Vincent, who was only 19 years old. They met after he arranged her stepmother's funeral. Rose was devastated because her stepmother had basically raised her, and she found comfort in Mark. She would later say that Mark was the first man she had ever been with. They continued the relationship for about 5 months and only stopped because he met and married Julie. However, the relationship started up again around 2003 or 2004. At that point, they were meeting on a regular basis at the funeral homes he owned. Rose was also married now and had 3 young children. This time around, she fell in love with Mark and wanted to be Mrs. Bowling. Not to mention, Mark was a very well-off individual, and he had made a lot of money from his funeral homes. This was a different lifestyle for Rose, who grew up very impoverished. In the end, it would prove to be a recipe for disaster. In early December, Mark left for a scuba trip in Florida while Julie stayed home. On December 8th, Julie strangely failed to show up for work, and she wasn't answering her phone. Her friend and coworker, Linda Gardner, was worried because Julie had been telling her for the past few weeks that she feared Mark was going to kill her and that he could get away with it by putting her in the funeral home's cremation oven. She also told her another time that she felt that he was having her followed. When Linda arrived at the house that day, all her fears would come true. When she pulled up, she found the garage door open and Linda's vehicle still inside. Upon entering, she sadly found Julie lying on her back, shot to death, and quickly called 911. When investigators arrived, they found that she had been shot 4 times. Upon searching the home, they found a gun safe with a lot of .32 caliber Smith & Wesson bullets sitting on the top of it. Those were checked and matched to the bullets used to kill Julie. However, they still needed to find the murder weapon. The following day, when investigators brought Mark in for questioning, they asked if he knew who might have committed the crime. That's when he came clean and confessed to stepping outside the marriage on multiple occasions and said he had also used escort services a few times. He then gave them the name of his most recent affair, Rose Vincent. He claims that she even began stalking him and had said that she wanted to wring Julie's neck and take a baseball bat to her. When Rose was brought in, she initially denied being involved, but once investigators falsely told her that they had proof and that Mark had identified her as the killer, she suddenly had a change of heart and began telling everything. While she confessed to pulling the trigger, she said Mark was the mastermind behind the whole thing. She said that Mark had offered her $50,000 to kill his wife and even threatened to kill himself if she didn't do it. He also promised to give her everything she wanted if she got rid of Julie. She said he even provided her with a map and specific instructions on how to carry out the crime while he was away in Florida. Investigators also learned that they had tried to carry out the murder on 3 different occasions before finally being successful on December 8, 2006. She said that on the day of the murder, she arrived early in the morning when it was still dark. Before Mark left for his trip, he had unscrewed the outside bulb so that the light wouldn't come on. After arriving, she sent Mark a text. Mark responded saying, "Let me call Julie and find out when she is leaving." Interestingly, the answering machine picked up right before Julie and recorded their conversation. When he asks her what time she is heading to work, she tells him she is leaving at her normal time and then gives him the time. He then asks if she is going out through the garage, which she says, of course. He tells her he loves her and hangs up. It's a very strange conversation, and I have to imagine Julie felt the same way. Mark texts Rose back, letting her know that Julie is coming out of the garage and to get ready. When Julie opens the garage, she turns to set the alarm, and that's when Rose rushes her. Julie turns around only to be shot multiple times. Rose said that she kept shooting until the gun was empty. She then drove to her stepmother's cemetery and buried the gun next to her grave. Before the interrogation was over, she told them the location of the cemetery, which was on Old Carriage Road, not far from the home. Sure enough, upon searching the cemetery, they found a Depression-era .32 caliber Harrington and Richardson revolver. She said the whole plan for the murder started when she jokingly said she should knock off Julie. However, Mark took that as an opportunity to get rid of his wife and began planning the murder. At that point, investigators had all they needed and arrested them both. In the end, Rose pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and was sentenced to 28 to 34 years in prison. She also agreed to testify against Mark. However, 6 days into his trial in October 2008, he also decided to take a plea deal and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to murder and was sentenced to 19 years and 8 months in prison. While his projected release was August 31, 2022, he wouldn't make it and died of natural causes in 2018 at the age of 47. As of July 2024, Rose is still serving her time in the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. She is projected to be released on May 26, 2035, and will likely not be released early for good behavior because while in prison, she has received 13 infractions involving self-injury, theft of property, assault on an inmate by throwing liquids, selling or misusing medication, and interfering with staff. On May 12, 1972, a fisherman stumbled upon a man's remains in a field near a canal in Eloise, Florida. Unfortunately, the victim had no identification on him and was badly decomposed. An autopsy determined that the cause of death was 2 gunshot wounds to the head, and the manner of death was homicide. The man's age was estimated to be between 40 and 50 years old. However, with no way to identify him, he was buried as a John Doe in the Lakeside Memorial Cemetery in Winter Haven, Florida. The case would then go unsolved for the next 52 years. 2 years after the man's remains were found, in January 1974, a prisoner named Charles Williams contacted investigators claiming to have information about the murder. He said that in 1973, he was in Rayford Prison with a man by the name of Clarence Ingram, who was in prison for killing Sam Holland in Lake County in 1973. Ingram told Williams about an incident that occurred at a bar in Winter Haven, Florida in 1972. He said that he and a man named Edgar Todd met an unknown man at the bar, and they all 3 left together in his vehicle. However, during the drive, an argument broke out, and the man was shot twice with a .22 caliber pistol. After he was dead, they dumped his body near a canal and stole his tools valued between $1,000 and $1,500. The tools were ultimately sold to Ingram's brother Johnny. They then drove the man's car to Michigan and sold it for $500. They were able to confirm that Ingram had been in Michigan because police had stopped him in Paw Paw, Michigan on May 25, 1972. However, it still didn't get them any closer to finding out the man's identity. In February of 2017, the case was re-looked at and the man's remains were exhumed. His DNA was then sent to the University of North Texas and subsequently entered into CODIS, but no matches were found. In November 2023, they sought the help of Othram, along with their forensic genetic genealogy team, and they were able to provide a potential lead, a man by the name of Mack Proctor. Mack was born on November 28, 1914, and was last seen by his family in Georgia sometime between 1969 and 1972. However, he was never officially reported missing. His family described him as a master mechanic, hence the tools in his car. A second DNA test was then performed and confirmed the remains belonged to Mack. Unfortunately, his murderers cannot be brought to justice because Clarence Ingram died in 1995, Edgar Todd died in 2015, and Johnny Ingram, who bought the tools, died in 2003. Investigators said there is now enough circumstantial evidence to arrest them if they were still alive. Thankfully, at least his family now has some long-awaited answers. Maria Frances Lauterbach was born with fetal alcohol syndrome on November 17, 1987, and adopted by Victor and Mary Lauterbach. An agency handled the adoption, and they never met Maria's biological parents. She grew up in Vandalia, Ohio, and attended Butler High School, where she unfortunately stayed in constant trouble. She had a very disrespectful attitude and was always getting into arguments. However, no matter what she did, her loving parents always stuck by her side. After high school, her parents encouraged her to join the Marines, thinking it might provide her with the help she needed. However, they never imagined how big of a mistake that would be, and in the end, Maria would die a horrible death. On June 6, 2006, she joined the Marines and headed off to boot camp. Afterward, she was stationed at Camp Lejeune, a military training facility in Jacksonville, North Carolina. On May 13, 2007, 20-year-old Maria called her mother to wish her Happy Mother's Day. While on the phone call, she told her mother she had been sexually assaulted a month earlier by her supervisor, Corporal Cesar Armando Lorraine, while on night duty. Mary was horrified and urged her to report the incident to the police. She did as her mother asked, but instead of reporting it to the police, she reported it to the officer in charge. She was then interviewed by the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. However, the officer in charge was not on her side and told the NCIS that Maria was a troublemaker who was trying to seek retribution against Lorraine, who he described as a stellar Marine. Maria was then assigned a victim advocate and transferred to a different building. However, she remained in the same unit. She continued to pursue charges against Lorraine, and by the following month, she discovered she was pregnant. As the months went by, those around her tried to encourage her to drop the charges, but Maria wasn't having it. Around early December 2007, Mary planned to visit her daughter, who was now 8 months pregnant. Maria called her on Friday, December 14th, and expressed her excitement for the visit. She also told her mother that she had to attend a mandatory Christmas party and hated the fact that Lorraine would also be there. Mary told her to show up to the party, make sure the necessary people saw her, and then leave. She also asked her to call once she arrived back home, but sadly, she would never get that call and never heard from her daughter again. The call she got was from Maria's roommate, who told Mary she found a strange note that read, "I cannot take this Marine life anymore. I am leaving. Sorry for the inconvenience." Mary was baffled and extremely confused because the note didn't match the conversation she just had with her daughter earlier that day. So she began to call around trying to find her. However, people dismissed her concerns and said that Maria would probably show back up soon and that there was nothing they could do. Mary then reported her missing to the Jacksonville police, who assured her they would find her. So Mary went home while investigators began looking for her. While there, she received a call from Maria's cell phone. However, excitement quickly faded when a man on the line said he found the phone on the side of the road about half a mile from Camp Lejeune's main gate. The man had discovered it because he had a flat and didn't have a spare, so he had to walk to find assistance. She thanked him and asked him to drop the phone at the police station, which he did. After Christmas, when there was still no sign of Maria, Mary headed to Jacksonville to find out what was going on. When she arrived, she discovered that a new detective had been assigned to the case. He was a retired Marine who had worked in security for 30 years, and he realized that investigators had never worked on her daughter's case. There was absolutely nothing in Maria's case file, not the alleged note that her roommate found, or anything about the man finding her cell phone. So the two went to Camp Lejeune to meet with NCIS. When they arrived, the detective asked to speak with Lorraine, but NCIS's response was, and I quote, "Why? He had nothing to do with this." I have no clue why they would say that, because Maria disappeared while pregnant and preparing to testify against Lorraine for the sexual assault. Their response was most likely because they had done nothing to protect her when she originally reported the crime and instead sided with Lorraine. NCIS was hesitant, but set up the interview anyway. Mary and the detective also learned that someone had attempted to use Maria's bank card at an ATM on Christmas Eve, and it was caught on surveillance. While it was hard to accept, Mary knew Maria was likely gone and vowed to spend the rest of her life if that's what it took to find her. The following month, in January of 2008, investigators got a search warrant to search the backyard of Laurian's house in Jacksonville, Florida. It was there they found a fire pit. When it was removed, they shockingly found Maria's remains. They also found a large amount of Maria's blood inside his home, and it appeared he had tried to clean it up and paint over it. They now had the evidence they needed to arrest him, but he was nowhere to be found. He had fled and left a note which his wife Christina found that claimed that Maria had taken her own life and that he buried her out of fear of being blamed for her death. However, an autopsy proved this information to be false. The autopsy showed that Maria had actually been beaten to death. 3 months later, Laurian was found in a small town in Mexico, and in 2009, he was extradited back to the States, and in 2010, he was charged with her murder. Prosecutors determined that Laurian needed to get rid of her to keep her from harming his military career. He originally hatched a plan to have her move to Mexico, which would leave her with an AWOL charge and ultimately discredit her. However, he couldn't risk her returning and lured her to his home to look at baby clothes and other items. Once there, he beat her to death with a crowbar. Interestingly, DNA actually showed he wasn't the father of her child. Her blood was later found all over his garage and on a crowbar that he gave to a fellow Marine 2 days after Maria disappeared. He then used her bank card and moved her car around Jacksonville to throw off the investigation. He also built a fire in the pit after he buried her remains. In the end, Laurian was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was also found guilty of financial transaction card theft and attempted financial transaction card fraud for using her bank card. Her murder has since changed the way the Defense Department handles sexual assault allegations. Mildred Matheny was born to parents Jesse and Lizzie Warren in Wilmer, Arkansas, on February 28, 1907. She then went on to become a nurse. On October 21, 1931, she married Guy Harmon Matheny, and they moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. Sadly, he passed away in 1958. By 1985, 78-year-old Mildred had unfortunately developed dementia and was now living with her sister in Lake Worth, Florida. Sadly, after moving to Florida, a horrible tragedy would occur. Since Mildred had wandered off in the past, which is common with people with dementia, she wasn't typically allowed outside by herself. However, on April 27, 1985, she was able to wander off before anyone noticed and was sadly never seen alive again. Neighbors reported seeing her walking down the street in her pajamas with an orange blouse sometime between 3:30 and 4 p.m. on the day she strangely vanished. By 4:30 p.m., when her sister couldn't find her, she reported Mildred missing. 7 hours later, just before 10 p.m., about 30 miles away, a passerby found her naked and unconscious on a dirt road in Jupiter, Florida. She had been beaten and sexually assaulted and was barely hanging on. Sadly, her injuries were too severe, and she died 11 days later on May 8, 1985. Thankfully, evidence was collected from the scene and a sexual assault kit was used. However, even with that, the case would still go unsolved for the next 35 years. In 2019, with hopes of solving the case, the Sheriff's Cold Case Unit released a video with previously unreleased information. That information included a statement from witnesses who had seen Mildred getting into a brown, two-door 1967 Oldsmobile Delta 88 with a young man near Lucerne Avenue, about 2 miles from her sister's home. The witnesses questioned the man, who said he was her neighbor and was giving her a ride home. In April 2021, the DNA from the sexual assault kit was uploaded to CODIS and matched to 61-year-old Richard C. Lange Sr., who was 25 at the time of the murder. He was a career criminal, including convictions in 1983 and 1993 for aggravated assault, and received probation for each conviction. In 2006 and 2012, he was convicted on weapons charges and received short jail sentences. He was then arrested for the murder and held without bond. In the end, on February 1, 2023, he was convicted of her murder and sentenced to life in prison. Meigellic Young was born on August 11, 2016, and went by the nickname Jelly, which is short for jelly bean. Jelly loved unicorns, pocketbooks, Peppa Pig, and cheesy tots. She lived with her father, Darius Young, in Charlotte, North Carolina, but never knew her mother, Malika Bennett. Bennett dropped Meigellic off to Darius when she was 3 months old and never returned. That is until Meigellic began asking about her mother. Darius was planning a birthday party for her 4th birthday and invited Malika to attend. After the party, he let her take Meigellic home with her, believing they could spend the weekend getting to know each other. Sadly, that would be a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Malika told him she would take her swimming and bring her back after the weekend, but that never happened. He made plans to meet her at a park to get Meigellic, but she never showed up. He then saw her at a nail shop and said she looked frantic. He then tried going by her home multiple times, but she would never come to the door. He also called the police, who came out and knocked on the door, but once again, nothing. He asked them to check the backyard, but they didn't. He was then told that she would be entered into the system, but he would soon discover that she wasn't after calling the 24-hour child abuse hotline. Thankfully, the person at the child abuse hotline immediately entered the information upon discovering it was missing. On May 21, 2021, detectives went to Malika's home on Braden Drive in Charlotte and, upon searching the backyard, found Meigellic's body in a shallow grave. They estimated she had been dead since last August, not long after her mother took her. 31-year-old Malika was then arrested and charged with first-degree murder, felony child abuse, inflicting physical injury, and felony concealing a death. She also had 3 misdemeanor child abuse charges from February 2020, 6 months before she took Meigellic, charges that Darius was unaware of. Malika's mother, 53-year-old Tammy Taylor Moffitt, was also arrested and charged with concealing a death and accessory to murder after the fact. Interestingly, the house where Malika lived and Meigellic was found buried had the police called out 77 times since January 2020. The details that led to her death would unfortunately come from Malika's 13-year-old daughter. She said her mother made Meigellic stand in the laundry room for 3 days as punishment for having an accident in her pants. During that time, her mother hit and punched Meigellic and made her hold large jars filled with liquid in each hand. She eventually became too weak to stand, fell out the back door, and hit her head. She says her mother tried to perform CPR, but it was unsuccessful, and Meigellic died right where she fell. Malika then placed her body into plastic trash bags and put them in the trunk of her SUV, where it remained for 5 days before the smell became too much. She then bought a shovel and made her 13-year-old daughter pick Meigellic up and place her in the shallow grave she dug. She then parked a van over top of it. I wasn't able to find the outcome of Tammy's case, but Malika was offered a plea deal that would have required her to serve 5 years in prison. However, she refused to take it, and in the end, she was found guilty and sentenced to 25 to 31 years in prison.